So moving on to the second video on my 12 rules for Mad Miracles of Dozen recovery. How I defeated mental sickness and reclaimed my life, which is based on my own technique for, improving my quality of life and extricating myself from the psychiatric system, which I found none too helpful. Which you can read about in some, you can listen, you can hear about in some of my other lectures or read about in my book. And in the last talk, I was just giving a few of my views on Jordan Peterson and paying homage to him, giving a little critique where I see his strengths and weaknesses lying. And now I'll move on to my own, what I've got in my own book about my own 12 rules. I prefaced my 12 rules with a quote from a novel called I, Lucifer by Glenn Duncan. And that is reflective of what is really my kind of my fall from grace in my very unfortunate and traumatic, harmful psychiatric treatment. So perhaps it's quite natural that quotes from a book like that would resonate with me. And the quote is, "For you, my darlings, freedom to do what you like is discovery of how unlikable what you like to do makes you. Not that stops you doing what you like, since you like doing what you like more than you like liking what you do." So if people can process that kind of interestingly worded, sort of paradoxical kind of quote, you like doing what you like more than you like liking what you do, and that's kind of how I was, very much at the time anyway, and I'm sure it's how a lot of people are, particularly young people. People just want to, be given some leeway and freedom, particularly when they're young and they've been subject to, 15 years of, compelled schooling, pretty low standard schooling. And they just want to discover themselves and do what they like. And that itself is extremely, that itself is a joy and a pleasure. And if somebody then tries to stop you from doing exactly what you like, even when you're not hurting anybody else, and, for no apparent reason other than, for your own best interests, like psychiatry, it's, insufferable and absurd. And it obviously has exactly the opposite effect of making you utterly, utterly miserable. See, because it's more important, it's often more important to choose what you do than it is, to do the right thing or it's more important to be able to do what you like than it is to like what you do. If somebody is forcing you to do something, even if you would otherwise be content with doing it, or you might choose it anyway, the very fact that you're being forced to do it deprives you of all enjoyment in it, and turns it into something extremely onerous and oppressive. And in fact, in some ways, it's even worse than being made to do something that you don't like, because when you're made to do something that you like, you begin to associate it with oppression, and it robs the very thing which you used to love of your love of it. you know, I think most children have a natural love of learning and they have a natural curiosity. But send them to school for, 5 years or 15 years, drilling them to sit in classrooms without much choice in the matter, subject to material, learning materials which were not prompted by their natural questioning, curiosity, their own instinct and will. And you may very well turn out, people who they just want to get away from all education or learning. And it's very hard to rekindle their natural love of learning. um, in a lot of people, probably most people, if you tell them not to do something, they're going to want to do exactly that thing. Um, and if you're unkind and insensitive in the way you tell somebody to do something, it's just going to make them not want to do it, even if they would be quite happy doing it otherwise. And this is very, very important to bear in mind when examining our highly, highly coercive so-called mental health system. The aspect of surveillance and pressurizing, or oftentimes, outright coercion and violence, is 100% incompatible with any therapeutic benefit. Because most people, particularly young people, they prefer doing what they like than even liking what they do. Is there anything attractive in itself about being a junkie or a drug addict of some kind, or is it because young people are disgruntled by the way they've been treated by adults, and they know that using drugs is frowned upon, so they do it as their only outlet of retaliation against their parents and against society, which is extremely cruel and oppressive towards them. In some ways to their own detriment, because doing drugs is not really, generally it's usually not intrinsically pleasurable. It ends in bad consequences, and that is perceptible to most young people. It's only because it's forbidden that makes it attractive. When something is forbidden, it acquires the thrill and the allure and the intimacy of something special outside of what others are doing. and also of rebellion. um, and if rebellion isn't in itself pleasurable, well, it's very glorified by our own culture in many ways. Um, and it's worth pointing out that the whole medical establishment and also the legal establishment, it it relies for its own continuation, its own perpetuation on the very crimes or illnesses which is allegedly in place to to stamp out or to heal. So there is an inherent conflict of interest, and this is just one aspect, but it's very, very important to bear in mind when considering the issue. You know, at least for a complete picture. Um, a society, or a profession which requires for its very sustenance that you do exactly what you're told not to do, or that you become ill so it can heal you. Without that, it would not exist and lose all its status and authority. Um, such a such a society or such a profession, is not impartial, and you cannot totally believe it when it says, it doesn't want you to do this. Um, if you recognize reality, what you see is, in the case of psychiatry, they're making up enormous amounts of imaginary illnesses in order to get more business. Um, um, and then, them they're making you more ill with their pills so they can have more business, all under the pretext of healing you. Um, and in the case of the legal system and the prison system, what you see is them making very, very harmless things, into quite serious legal offences, which you can get considerable time in prison for, which only tend to entrench the negative behaviours or criminal behaviours, make them more serious, and cause more harm to society. Um, so always be wary, of people who tell you what to do, and suspect that you know there's something disingenuous there. If people really care about you, they they give you freedom, and they exhort you to follow your own will, your own wishes, your own desires. And they understand and recognize that that is the premise of your happiness. People who try to formalize into rules which abstract from the human will, human happiness, they are very, very suspect. And usually they will have some vested interest in the instructions that they're giving you, which is not conducive to your own happiness. The human will, the individual will, in our education system and upbringing, is like occluded. It's obfuscated. And is that by accident or is it deliberate? Um, Either way, it's very, very misleading for most people and keeps them hostage to the desires and the wills of others. And it results in a lot of the dysfunction that you see in individuals. Because if an individual is not even aware that their own desires and their own will are the main path to realizing their own personal happiness, they're going to be very frustrated, and it's going to result in senseless anger towards themselves and others. People, instead of realizing their own will, they just become irascible and irritable towards others for doing the same, for doing what they really want to do, which is trying to satisfy their own desires. And maybe they don't realize this until much, much too late, and then they become extremely bitter, and the problem gets even worse. So, in order to create a healthy society, you have to actually teach children at a fairly young age that the centrality of their own will, and kindly go about helping them fulfill it, and then attune it to reality in a prudent way, for their own benefit, and foster, and build on healthy egoism, starting with when people are very, very young, rather than blaming people for being selfish or narcissistic, or brats, blaming children for being, brats and little princes, the the king, the king in the manger or something, that Freud, the expression that Freud used, it seems a very cruel and stupid way to treat children, rather than actually legitimizing their healthy egoism and simply building on it and teaching them to just harmonize it with the egoism of others. But also sanctifying their own egotism, their own egoism. this is a, you know, a strong, this has a strong, venerable lineage in human thought. What I'm saying, Nietzsche's central concept, the concept of the will to power. Nietzsche's approach, was to centralize the human will and to build on that, and to build on healthy egoism. And that was really the arbiter of everything, almost, Nietzsche. It was the fundamental metaphysical principle. And we also see it in other parts of the Western tradition or human tradition. For instance, in more spiritual fields or the occult, um, we have but it's just what I'm aware of, and straight and stands out to me that it's in the writings of the much maligned Aleister Crowley. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. But it's not just Aleister Crowley. This is a central uh, uh, doctrine of a wide field of occultism and alternative spirituality, secret societies, etc. as well. And you'd be a fool to dismiss it because of its slightly immoral connotations, black magic, etc. I would, as with everything, preserve a somewhat skeptical and open-minded attitude, and don't necessarily consider it to be, the 100% whole truth. Because that's a very extreme statement. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. As a moral rule, that seems questionable. For moral reasons, and also if it was considered legal, that would seem strange for a legal code of society. But as a route to human happiness, it's much, much more honest and worth crediting for that reason than what children commonly get taught or what they don't get taught. It's I'm very interested, and I'd love to hear if people have different opinions, and how they would explain it. But to me, it seems a very logical and rational principle that is also borne out by experience. That the centrality of the will and human desire in the fulfillment of human happiness. Whereas it's very easy and plausible to dismiss most of the criticism of that view or the naysaying as kind of morally motivated resentment, and their fears that that other people, if they just build on their own desires and their own will, they're going to do things which maybe harm others or hurt others. But as to the central thing we're considering, human happiness, individual happiness, that would be even if it were true, it would be a irrelevant, almost irrelevant, argument. It would be important for other reasons, but what we're actually discussing is, individual happiness, individual fulfillment, and the nature of that, and the nature of the individual. Um, People can have lots of self-interested motives for obscuring the centrality of human self-interest, or the centrality of the human desire and human will in self-interest. But they're doing that from self-interested reasons, or possibly misguided moral reasons. But often it's going to be somewhat selfish, or misguided selfish reasons. People would rather tell another person not to do what they want than they would, to do what they want themselves. But that's only there in preference, because they enjoy making other people miserable, keeping them servile more than they do, realizing their own dreams. um, so, I mean, anybody who's influenced by Nietzsche, or anybody who takes Jordan Peterson seriously in his views and thinks that he's a great guy, they would be rather inconsistent to not pay enormous attention to Nietzsche's proclamation of the centrality of the will for human happiness. Whereas psychiatry completely abstracts from the will entirely. It won't even mention it, and in fact interprets any willful, personal chosen actions as a sign of pathology. It completely rides roughshod over the individual will and tries to suppress it. It wants a mindless herd conformity. What Heidegger calls inauthentic existence is what it calls health. Existentialism and psychiatry are not only different, they're polar opposites and inversions of one another. So I prefaced my own 12 rules for Mad Miracles of Desert Recovery with with a quote from the Bible, which is from Matthew chapter 6:3. When you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That's a very interesting and quite deep spiritual rule or law. Um, and I don't think I'll go into that, here. I mean, maybe for the very reason, following that law, it kind of means don't always explain everything you do and don't always explain to yourself everything you do. um, and obviously it's fitting or, uh, well, I don't know if it's appropriate for me, but um, it's fitting for an attempt to give 12 rules of, guidance for other people, obviously, to help them. So I'll go on to the first rule and read it out. Believe in your own star, form an unshakable attachment to life. In some sense, I was always very attached to life. I had a lot of life in me, and a very vague, dim, but also rather lofty and grand, extremely so perhaps, lingering hope for the future somewhere deep inside me. On a more conscious level, I was lost for years in doubt, nihilism, and despair. I was like a farmer who had been given a plot of land to tend and sow, but instead was just standing there, sighing. What is the point of sowing these seeds? What does it all matter? Then suddenly this plot came under attack and became highly threatened by wild beasts, a marauding herd. And suddenly I became highly, highly concerned and motivated with holding on with all my might to this one seemingly accursed and almost pointless plot of land. The only property I had, my only slim chance I had of anything, my very life. The sooner you realize that this is the way it is, the better. As Martin Heidegger said, the way to embrace life to the fullest is to face squarely your own mortality. Then grab being by the horns. There's nothing else, and you can't make it go away or otherwise by just demurring from life. You won't remain free from sin by avoiding embracing life in all its injustice and cruelty. You will only sin 1,000 times worse. To reject life is to fail to love your God. God is the universe. To fail to love it is to go through the motions and avoid your responsibilities, avoid facing reality. Nietzsche and Jesus meant something very similar. That's referring to Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, or love of fate, and his exhorting us to embrace life. What you're most afraid of is not your troubles, but your own possibilities. If you allow yourself to begin to rise and achieve your dreams, others will try to tear you down, which they often do. But always remember, when you give yourself license to believe in yourself and shoot for the stars, far from being narcissistic, you actually unconsciously are communicating to others that they have license to do the same, which is possibly the most philanthropic of gestures. And there's a quote by Zizek on that. He relates how on the Sabbath, Jewish believers meet in a synagogue and each of them says something. First, a big rabbi says, "Oh my God, I'm not worthy of your attention, God." Then a rich Jewish merchant comes and says, "Oh my God, I am also nobody and don't even consider me. I'm not even worthy of your attention." And then I hope you know the joke. A poor Jew stands up and says, "God, I'm also nobody." The rich merchant kicks the rabbi and says, "Who is this guy that he thinks he can also say that he is nobody?" So you see the hypocrisy and the deceit and falsity of our so-called modesty, in that. And what I'm saying is that you have people who are, embracing their own egos and their own desire for success and self-worth, and that's giving others license to do the same. And that's played out by this quote here by Zizek, where you have the exact inverse situation. You have the appearance of modesty, but underlying it is a haughty and self-entitled attitude towards others who are not even allowed to say that they're nothing and they're worthless. It's very strange, and imagine what kind of cruelty and catch-22 kind of situation that imposes on the poor person in this quote, the poor Jewish person. When you have overly complex and hypocritical codes in a society, that can be amazingly detrimental and harsh on people, where overt egoism or so-called narcissism, can be infinitely kinder, both to yourself and to them. Um, do not feel overrun by the group. The truth, the power, all lies within the single, fully activated human mind, and pretty much there alone. The group is just a miracle army or rescue brigade you can utilize. Furthermore, if you begin to have confidence, faith, that good things will happen to you, and focus on them, they are much more likely to occur. By all means, be wary, but only within the context of a fundamental faith in the safety of your own actions and affirmation of life. Believe in your own star. So, um, yeah, I mean, commitment to life and to one's own life, however that occurs, or however that may occur. It's not necessarily clear how it does occur, but some kind of will to commitment to one's own life, it is one of the mechanisms towards greater happiness and success. Some people are just kind of are just waiting for something to happen, or they see the some of the negative aspects of life or the injustices, and they may respond in what Nietzsche called a slave morality mentality, where they recoil from the injustices in such a way that prevents them from being sufficiently ruthless in their own life, both to their own detriment and to the detriment of people around them, and particularly if they're entirely wound up in finding fault with others and depriving them of their enjoyment in life. Well, that could be potentially equally cruel as simply being a bit more ruthless in their own life. Um, if they are so, so hung up with slave morality and the false morality or injustice, misguided sense of injustice around them, that they're not able to assert their own will and their own egos, as I've talked about, that is going to preempt and cut off any possibility of happiness in their life, prematurely. So they mustn't refute their own will. They mustn't refute their own life force and take sides against, whatever grounds, on supposedly moral grounds. Instead, they need to assert themselves to some extent and at least embrace their own desires and their own right to fulfillment of their own desires and their own will. I mean, maybe they shape and mold those desires and harmonize them with the desires of others or the real world, but they must embrace and celebrate their own desires and their own will. And you see, self-belief, into believing yourself, your own star, so to speak, is the prerequisite for any other accomplishment in life. If you don't even believe in yourself and believe in your own beliefs, so to speak, because that is possible, you can be too reserved and doubt and refuse to assert yourself and refuse to even try and get to a state where you really believe in something. If you refuse to do that, then you can't accomplish anything by definition, because to accomplish anything positive, you have to actually be positively committed and invest in something and be passionate and fully invested in your own actions. And lots of people, it's worth pointing out that lots of people maybe appear to be, very committed and, full of action, obsessed with, imposing themselves on others, on the world. But it's worth bearing in mind that this may not actually stem from true self-belief and true embrace of their own desires, but they can be just kind of like irritably and reactively acting on their programming to try and suppress other people's desires, like what I've talked about, what Nietzsche called slave morality. Um, and these people they may be active in a certain sense, but they're never going to accomplish anything positive because their actions actually don't stem from true conviction and true self, a true embrace of themselves. But I think, in my opinion, some form of what would be described as self-alienation and self-hatred, morally conditioned self-hatred. So there's an old kind of maxim: strength through joy, strength through joy. That was, I think, a World War II maxim on the the German side, perhaps. But it's also a very true phrase, and basically, the more you embrace life and the more joy you feel. Joy is kind of like is in itself like a feeling of the embrace of life. It's a will that life exists and that oneself exists. And the more one can cultivate this, positively, consciously, because one can cultivate it consciously. The more it will build on itself, and one will be capable of effective action in the world. To celebrate life itself gives strength to enjoy and to accomplish things which will make life even more enjoyable. And so, as I say here, thinking one's own mortality, as Martin Heidegger talked about, can be one of the roots to this kind of, increased celebration and attachment to one's own life. Because it's only when we, fear losing something that we often recognize its value and begin to become properly committed to it. And it's the passing nature, the vicissitudinal nature of life that imbues it with an infinitely precious and touching sympathy for ourselves and for others. A poignancy. So that is one of the kind of the psychological strategies for adopting a more positive and resolute attitudes towards life. You bear in mind its passing nature and how precious it really is to you. And people should think of themselves as individuals. Believe in your own star, um, with a certain mission and destiny that they might have to contribute and fulfill, and see themselves in all their beautiful snowflake uniqueness. And because the rarer something it is, we instinctively see the rarer that something is, the more precious it is, the more valuable it is in certain ways. So it's very good to recognize ourselves and others in their own uniqueness, rather than reducing one another to a homogeneous tribal mass, which is the really, that latter tendency is really the secret to dehumanization of everybody, and the key to extermination camps, because it's very easy to, as Stalin said, to exterminate statistics. When a human being becomes a statistic, like a psychiatric a psychiatric patient, an NHS statistic, then they just treat it as a general diagnostic specimen. It's very, very easy to destroy them and ride roughshod over them, which is in fact what occurs. Whereas the more you see them as unique, the more love you'll have for them, and the more love they'll have for themselves, the more they'll take care of themselves and one another. People revenge themselves against others, reducing them to statistics and generalities, because they never got the careful, special parental input or input from society and their teachers they felt they deserved when they were growing up. So they give up, and they retaliate by simply systematically trying to deprive others of it. And that's how so many people are, particularly the political left, but you see it very much in the political right as well, because this horrible term, snowflake, used in a mocking, disparaging manner. Which is, some of the ways it's used, some of the criticisms involved, maybe some have some legitimacy, in particular cases, but that general tendency to deprive, not give people, their individual uniqueness, and despise it, as to attack it as a form uh, of prissy narcissism is seemingly very, very mean spirited and nasty and counterproductive, because what harm does a snowflake do? Just think about it literally. I mean, snowflakes are not the problem. They're more like the solution. Um, it may be difficult at times to give everybody the attention they deserve, and treat them in the special way that is actually then their own unique nature. Um, but um, you know, somebody who is simply asking for, you know, dignity in their own individuality, you know, is not necessarily, you know, being, you know, enacting brutality and violence against others, as lots and lots and lots and lots of people are in our society. So really, you know, in order to succeed in life, you really do need to, as Jung said, individuate, which means, you know, believe in your own star. And there's an aspect of that which is actually literal, you know, um, you know, the heavens have a psychological significance, which people should like kind of look into. Um, but also, I mean, also just on a metaphorical and, you know, psychological level, I mean, the stars have a certain resonance. You know, the idea of, you know, being guided by the stars or the heavens is an idea that just by contemplating, you know, it can kind of lift us up and give us a certain consolation. You know, because the stars are twinkly and they're very distant, and because they're so distant, you know, and sparkly, they provide a lot of space for longing and striving. You know, for some, you know, they're a metaphor for a very distant and beautiful goal. Um, so people should, you know, instead of just mindlessly doing what people around them are doing, the more they can set a personal goal, preferably, you know, a long time in the future, and work tirelessly towards it. You know, that is real individuation, and it's liable to produce far more fulfillment and happiness, and also contribute, you know, more positively to others and to society.